The extremely fantastic death of Superman's saga takes place in 4 parts, with the first one called Doomsday, which is about his death burner. Of course, the story doesn't end there. With 3 more parts spread across various books, the saga explores how Superman's death affects others in the DC universe, how Superman's imposters try to replace him, and then there's the finale. So, without further ado, let's begin exploring the entire death of Superman saga. Superman, Man of Steel, number 18. The Doomsday Story arc starts ominously with a gloved fist repeatedly punching a metal wall. As the hammering continues, the glove tears to reveal short claws of bone, and we see that the wall finally breaks. The ground shakes as the creature moves up through the Earth's crust till finally, it breaks through the surface and emerges in the countryside, revealing itself to be a masked monster with one hand tied behind its back. Meanwhile, at the Daily Planet, Lois Lane finds an anonymous note asking Superman to come to the basement of a power station and that Metropolis is in danger. She leaves a message for Clark and decides to check it out for herself. She gets there but is almost immediately captured by underworlders who are stealing electricity and intend to unleash their monster army on Metropolis. But Superman gets there in time to thwart their plans and save Lois. Elsewhere, the monster makes its way across the countryside, heading for Metropolis, destroying everything from trees to animals in its path. As it gets to the highway and starts attacking trucks, the call goes out to the Justice League for assistance. Justice League of America, number 69. Ice, Booster Gold, Maxima, Blue Beetle, Bloodwind, and Guy Gardner arrive on the scene, but the monster has already moved on, having disappeared into the woods. After helping carry the victims to safety, the team sets out to find the monster, tracking the trail of destruction through the forest to a Lex oil refinery. While the Leaguers tackle the monster, Superman, unaware of the trouble, gives an interview on television. Despite their efforts, the Leaguers on the scene are unable to stop the creature and sustain severe injuries. Superman's interview is interrupted by news of the monster, and he rushes to the spot where Booster Gold tells him it's like Doomsday is here, giving the creature a name. Superman, number 74. With the Leaguers all down, Doomsday makes its way to a housing development project, and Superman finally catches up to it. The Leaguers, including Superman, let loose with all their remaining power together on the monster, but find Doomsday still standing, but now with a half-revealed face showing bone growths all over its face. With a shout, it breaks free completely of the cables that were binding him, and with blinding speed, storms the Leaguers, knocking them asunder and fatally wounding them all except Superman. Doomsday then leaps high and bounds into the air. Adventures of Superman, number 497. Superman flies after Doomsday into the air and manages to bring him back on the ground, but Doomsday continues on his path, heading for a town. Superman doesn't hold back, but as they trade punches, he feels that Doomsday is getting stronger. The army gets called in, but their artillery fails to stop him. Back in Metropolis, Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen leave to cover the Doomsday Story. Luthor and Supergirl watch a news report stating the monster's current path will cut through New York and bring him to Metropolis. Supergirl tells Lex that she should go help, but he holds her back, saying he needs a contingency plan in case Doomsday does make his way to Metropolis. As Superman helps save military personnel, Maxima gets back in the fight and manages to slow down Doomsday a bit. She and Superman then fight him together, but Doomsday keeps getting back up to fight them. Maxima inadvertently causes an explosion, knocking herself and Superman out as Doomsday walks away once again. As Superman regains consciousness, Guardian arrives and asks him if all the destruction was necessary. Superman looks around him and tells him that he realizes now that he'll have to stop Doomsday alone. Action Comics, number 684. Leaving Guardian to take Maxima to a hospital, Superman takes to the air to track down Doomsday. The trail of destruction is hard to miss, and the two of them tangle once more at a hypermart just 60 miles from Metropolis. As Lois and Jimmy watch the fight from a Daily Planet news chopper, reporting the action live, Superman hurls Doomsday into the hills to avoid civilian casualties. As the fight continues, Doomsday lands on Habitat, an uninhabited tree city created by Cadmus Research. Superman uses one of the huge columns to strike Doomsday, and the entire structure comes crashing down as Superman barely gets clear. Doomsday lies buried in the rubble below. Having taken Maxima to a hospital, Guardian arrives once again to find Superman recovering from his fight. Suddenly, Doomsday bursts out from below, burying them both in rock as he leaps into the air, heading for Metropolis in the distance. Superman, the Man of Steel, number 19. Doomsday gets to the outskirts of Metropolis and continues his rampage. The suit he was in is ripped off, revealing a face and body covered in part by a bone exoskeleton. Superman comes in and, grabbing him from behind, rockets him toward outer space. But Doomsday kicks himself free, falling back down into the city and into underworld below. Superman goes in after him, and while pulling him out, a ruptured gas main causes a huge explosion, rocking the city above. With the fight now having reached Metropolis, Lex finally allows Supergirl to assist assist Superman, who's still holding on to Doomsday, flying him above the city. Doomsday manages to stab Superman in the ribs with his razor-sharp exoskeleton and gets free, throwing him off. Supergirl gets there as Superman falls, but Doomsday punches her down easily. As Doomsday falls back to the ground, Maggie Sawyer and the Special Crimes Unit open fire on the monster but are easily overpowered. A battered and bleeding Superman arrives on the scene and engages Doomsday yet again, shattering the creature's exoskeleton with his punches. Superman, number 75. As the two of them fight on the streets, Doomsday throws Superman into the Daily Planet chopper hovering nearby, and he's forced to break off the fight as he gets Lois and Jimmy to safety. He sets them down a short distance away, and Lois, looking at his battered condition, pleads with him to get help. He tells her it's too late for that since the JLA has already fallen and it's down to him alone. He kisses Lois, telling her he loves her, and rushes at Doomsday. Trading punches, the duo move through the city, and Doomsday pushes Superman into the ground in front of the Daily Planet building near Lois and Jimmy. As Doomsday moves toward Lois, Superman punches his way out from under the street behind him and attacks. The two spar again, the force of their punches shattering the glass in the buildings around them. Near the end of his strength, Superman puts everything he has into one last punch that he hammers into Doomsday, finally felling the creature and then collapsing himself. Lois rushes to his side and takes him in her arms, crying and telling him to hang on for the paramedics. As he breathes his last, Superman asks about Doomsday, and Lois tells him he saved them all. Having saved the people and the city he loved one last time, Superman dies. The second story arc, called Funeral for a Friend, picks up the story from the moment Superman died on the streets of Metropolis. Adventures of Superman, number 498. In the aftermath, as the bodies of Superman and Doomsday lie on the street, Double X appears and uses his psychokinetic abilities to scan their minds in turn. He says that he's getting nothing from either of them, confirming their deaths. Lois Lane, however, refuses to believe it. The EMS medics arrive on the scene and try to use a defibrillator to get his heart going, but are unable to do anything about it, saying the charge is probably too small to affect Superman's advanced physiology. Supergirl, who was downed by Doomsday, returns to her protoplasm form. She lies in the rubble on the street nearby and is taken away by Luthor. As an inconsolable Lois holds onto Superman's tattered cape, Cat Grant starts reporting live from the scene, telling the world that Superman is probably dead. Her report is watched at home by her boyfriend Jose Delgado, aka Gangbuster, and her young son Adam. Jose finds his old gangbuster costume in a case and thinks about how Cat begged him to stop being a vigilante. The Kents too watch the report at their home in Smallville and are shocked by the news but don't give up hope just yet. Westfield, the head of Cadmus Research, arrives on the scene with his men and starts to take away the bodies of Doomsday and Superman, but Maggie Sawyer intervenes, refusing him despite his threats. Still trying to revive Superman, Double X calls in Professor Emil Hamilton and his assistant Bibowski, who arrive with a device that can channel more energy into the defibrillator unit. Despite multiple attempts, however, they fail. At the Daily Planet, a grief-stricken Lois writes her article on the fight while Jimmy gives his photos to Perry for the next day's paper. Jimmy and Perry believe she's crying because Clark, her fiancé, is among the hundreds missing in the wake of Doomsday's destruction. As she leaves for home, they assure her that Clark will turn up soon. Justice League America, number 70. Meanwhile, the Leaguers who fought Doomsday learn about Superman's death on the news as they wait in the JLA compound, recovering from their wounds. They blame themselves for not having been at Superman's side. Blue Beetle is comatose and the Doctor isn't hopeful about his prospects for recovery. Soon, Flash, Batman, Robin, Aquaman, Green Lantern, Wonder Woman and other heroes begin to arrive at the compound. As they try to find a way to pay tribute, Oberon passes out black armbands with Superman's emblem on it and they put them on. Action Comics number 685. The next day, media reports on Superman's death continue around the world, left in shock. Claiming he's authorized to collect bodies of any alien descendants for study, Westfield and his soldiers come once again to try to collect Superman's and Doomsday's bodies from the morgue. The Guardian and Maggie Sawyer's team, however, stand up to him, telling him he's exceeded his authority. Luthor hears of this and sends Supergirl to the spot to disarm the Cadmus troops while he gets a presidential order preventing Westfield from taking the body. Lex then announces to the media that LexCorp will be erecting a monument to the Man of Steel and that Supergirl will carry on Superman's crusade for justice. Secretly, however, Lex is angry that Doomsday took away his opportunity to kill Superman and that he's been cheated of his vengeance. Superman, the Man of Steel, number 20. Taking solace in the fact that he'll be the one to bury Superman, Lex plans a grand funeral, an exclusive event which will be attended by world leaders and have pallbearers from the JLA. As Martha and Jonathan Kent grieve privately on the farm, Lois gathers up the courage to step out of the office to see the funeral cortege with the coffin and the JLA behind it. She decides to follow it all the way to the park where he's going to be buried. Batman, however, isn't part of the parade. Instead, he stops a bomber who wants to take advantage of the crowd to carry out about a political assassination. At the funeral, Jimmy Olsen gets into a fight with a mobster and Robin comes to his rescue. The fight, however, sets off a fight which Wonder Woman and Green Lantern manage to get under control. On the Kent farm, John and Martha have a private funeral for Clark where they bury a small box of the things he loved the most as a child. As Superman is finally laid to rest, Lois works up the courage to call Clark's parents, asking for forgiveness and telling them all she could do was report on the fight and watch Clark die. They tell her it's not her fault and that they're coming to Metropolis to be with her. Superman number 76. A week later, on Christmas Eve, members of the JLA gather in Metropolis to honor Superman. They go to the post office to help read his mail and fulfill a few requests, which was something Clark did every Christmas. As they read a variety of requests from all over the world, Wonder Woman finds a thank you note from a woman whose house was destroyed when Superman was fighting Doomsday, but she's thanking him for having saved her family's lives even though she can't afford to rebuild it and her husband has left them. To honor Superman, the team decides to help the woman and her family. The same evening, Lois Lane goes to Clark's apartment and finds Jonathan, Martha, and Lana waiting for her. They're the only people who know that Clark and Superman were the same person. They discuss the pros and cons of revealing the secret to the world and decide not to because Clark wanted privacy and wanted to live a normal life. The JLA team split up their duties. While Diana finds the woman's estranged husband and talks to him, Flash and Green Lantern help to rebuild the woman's house. Meanwhile, the woman's son, Mitch, comes to Metropolis to apologize to someone close to Superman because he believes he was responsible for Superman's death. He runs into Jimmy Olsen and they go to lunch, and Mitch tells him that he called for Superman's help just when he and a few members of the JLA caught up with Doomsday, and Superman came back to help, which resulted in Doomsday getting away and Superman having to fight him without the JLA's help in Metropolis. Olsen tells him he shouldn't blame himself and takes him to see the Superman memorial in the park. At the park, Jimmy thinks he hears a drill but thinks nothing of it. Deep below, however, Director Westfield and his men have tunneled their way into Superman's grave and steal his body. Adventures of Superman number 499. The robbery sets off an alarm in Lex's apartment and he sends Supergirl to investigate, telling her to use a secret access tunnel his workers had installed after the funeral. Supergirl gets to the park and makes her way through Lex's tunnel to the tomb and finds the coffin missing and another tunnel in an adjoining wall. Her entrance, however, is noted by an undercover police officer who calls Officer Dan Turpin to the scene, and he goes in after her. In another part of the city, Jose Delgado decides to don his gangbuster suit and fight crime once again. He stops a few drug dealers in a neighborhood, blowing up a car in the process. Supergirl explores the new tunnel and follows it till she finds a fork in the road. She picks one and finds herself in Underworld, where the creatures mistake her for an enemy. As she fights them, Turpin turns up and joins the fight. He sets off a few grenades, and Supergirl flies them out to safety as the explosion collapses the tunnel behind them. Coming out of the access tunnel, they find Maggie Sawyer waiting. Supergirl tells her that Superman's body is missing and flies away to report to Lex. Action Comics number 686. Back in Metropolis, the Guardian is out on patrol and stops some armed thugs who have stolen a van. As the police take them in, he gets a telepathic message from Double X calling him back to Cadmus Labs for an emergency. Lex gets to the tunnel entrance of Superman's tomb and meets Sawyer and Turpin. Supergirl tells them that she doesn't think the Underworlders took Superman's body, and they all decide to check out the other tunnel in the fork. They get to the fork but find the entrance to the other tunnel has also been collapsed recently with explosives. Supergirl clears away the rubble, and as they enter, Apperson mentions that they're under a river. Just then, an unexploded charge goes off, flooding the tunnel and they're forced back into the empty tomb. The Guardian gets to Cadmus Research and finds Westfield in a lab with Superman's body. He's outraged and starts to fight Westfield, but stops when he's told that they're trying to recreate Superman, cloning him the same way they cloned the Guardian. The Guardian allows them to go ahead with their plan, reasoning that there's at least a slim chance of getting Superman back. As Maggie and Luther get out of the tunnel, they decide not to tell the public that Superman's body has gone missing, fearing that the news could start a riot. As they all leave the park, Maggie tells Turpin she suspects that Cadmus is behind the robbery, a suspicion that Luther also separately shares with Apperson, saying that he wants to know what Westfield is trying to engineer with the body. Legacy of Superman. At Cadmus Labs, the scientists finally manage to get the DNA code of Superman on a disk, and while Westfield wants to rush to make a clone, Tompkins feels the process needs to be slower to ensure nothing goes wrong. When Westfield makes the argument that the longer they delay, the longer Metropolis will be unprotected, the Guardian proposes that they create multiple clones of him, a process that would be considerably quicker and easier. Westfield then reveals to them that he's already created a more advanced version of the Guardian, called Orin. Unlike the Guardian, Orin has augmented strength. indestructible alloy skin and is solar-powered. Therefore, he doesn't need to eat, sleep, or even breathe. Also, unlike Guardian, Auron can be programmed. Westfield orders Auron to retrieve the disc with Superman's DNA from Tompkins, using force if necessary. But the Newsboy clones manage to get it away from the room first as Guardian tangles with Auron. Auron catches up to the Newsboys and gets the disc, but they appeal to the part of him that's still Jim Harper, telling him that Jim would have wanted control of his own mind and would know the right thing to do. As Westfield catches up to the group, Auron imprints a copy of the disc in his computer mind before destroying the disc. He tells the Guardian that Superman's DNA shouldn't fall into careless hands and flies away, leaving her. In Metropolis, the news reports that there's been a sharp rise in crime across the city since the death of Superman. Rose Forrest comes home from a jog to find she's being robbed. The robber gets away with her VCR as she watches helplessly. She files a report with the police and gets her locks changed, but goes to bed scared. Later that night, her vengeful personality takes over and she goes out as the Thorn, looking for the robber. Interrogating street thugs, she tracks down the dealer in stolen goods and takes down the entire gang, leaving them for the police to arrest. As she makes her way back home, she thinks that with Superman gone, Metropolis needs the Thorn more than ever. In another part of the city, Gangbuster interrupts a weapons transaction between an arms dealer and a small-time street gang. He beats them all brutally before tying them up, but takes the main weapons dealer with him. He then calls the police to tell them where to go to arrest the street gang, but Inspector Henderson tells him that they can't press charges against perps who are beaten senseless. Henderson also tells Gangbuster that he's gone too far. Henderson is one of the few people who know Gangbuster's true identity and leaves the station to go find him. He tells Delgado that he's dishing out vengeance, not justice. Henderson tells him to leave town before he's arrested and gives him a one-way bus ticket. Meanwhile, Lex Luthor arranges a robbery in his office where a gang called the Terror Masters kill one of his secretaries and make off with a prototype gun. He mentions to his secretary Soraya that the gang can now destroy the city with that gun and fakes helplessness. Soraya, believing Lex to be a good man, gets her brother, the metahuman Sinbad, to track down the gang and help get the gun back. The gang use the gun on Sinbad, but after firing 2 shots, they see a hologram of Luthor telling them that they've probably destroyed whoever came after the gun and that it will now self-destruct. The gun explodes, killing the entire gang. Sinbad, who only got hit by 1 blast, was knocked out and didn't see Lex's message. He and Soraya go back home thinking that at least the gun won't destroy the city, unaware that he himself was the intended target. Superman, the Man of Steel, number 21. Jonathan and Martha Kent return to their farm and John recollects moments from Clark's childhood, from his favorite car to his antics at breakfast. He lies awake at night and thinks about how the Superman costume and secret identity were his idea and blames himself for Clark's death. In Metropolis, the flooding in the tunnel near Superman's tomb grows unabated and floods Underworld, forcing them to consider going up to the city for safety. They identify the source of the flooding to be a Cadmus lab explosive. As the flooding gets worse and overflows onto the streets of Metropolis, Lois Lane hears rumors of an explosion under Superman's grave. She investigates the tomb and is shocked to find it empty. She runs into Maggie Sawyer, who tells her what happened and also that the city is trying to keep the information from the public. Her Underworld contact Charlie finds her and tells her Cadmus caused the flooding, showing her the explosive as evidence. They conclude that Cadmus must have Superman's body, and Lois goes into the tunnels with the Underworlders. They find their way into Cadmus and locate Superman's body, but Guardian and some guards arrive, forcing them to escape, leaving the body behind. Lois goes back and writes an article about Superman's body being missing to force the city into doing something about it. Jonathan Kent reads the article the following day, and the loss of his son finally gets too much for him and he collapses in the field. Superman number 77. Lois goes to Luthor's office and shows him her article in its entirety, which includes Cadmus's plans to clone him. She tells him that Cadmus will just deny the allegations, but perhaps he can do something about it. With his earlier suspicions confirmed, Lex is outraged and promises to get Superman's body back. Supergirl breaks into the Cadmus facility and gets Superman's body back, placing it back in the tomb with Lois and Lex present. In Smallville, Jonathan is rushed to the emergency room. He's diagnosed with a heart attack and his pulse is almost non-existent. As the medics try to revive him, he dreams about Clark's childhood years and finally flatlines. Supergirl and Team Luthor. A few days later in Metropolis, Lex Luthor meets with the city council where he proposes that Supergirl and Team Luthor be given the same special police powers that Superman once had to better fight crime in the city and prevent the rise of vigilantes like the Thorn and Gangbuster. The mayor, however, has reservations about the proposal and asks who will take responsibility for the actions of Team Luthor. Luthor, meanwhile, had already arranged for a terrorist group called the DMT to infiltrate and take over a wing of Star Labs, arming themselves with the high-tech equipment there. His meeting with inside, the mayor is interrupted by the news from Star, and as the council wonders what to do, he proposes that Team Luthor will take care of it, unveiling a suit of armor for himself. Supergirl, Lex, and Team Luthor burst into Star Labs, catching the terrorists by surprise. They defeat the terrorists, but Lex breaks his leg when the ceiling collapses on him. The actions of Team Luthor, however, don't sway the city council. Adventures of Superman, number 500. Back at the hospital, doctors scramble to try to revive Jonathan Kent. They get a very faint heartbeat, but it's not enough. Jonathan dreams of meeting Clark in the afterlife, while Lois comes in from Metropolis to be with Martha. John finally wakes up, telling Lois and Martha that he's brought Clark back before drifting off to sleep out of danger. In the meantime, Jose Delgado, the gangbuster, interrupts a drug deal in progress, not realizing that it's an undercover police operation to bust a cartel. As police officers close in on him, he attacks them, getting shot as he gets away. He realizes that he's now an outlaw and gets on a bus to leave town. As Lois flies back to Metropolis, she and other passengers see a red blur in the sky. As she lands, news reports pour in of Superman saving people across the country. She rushes to Superman's tomb and finds the coffin open and empty. The third arc of the story is titled Reign of the Supermen and tells stories of the appearance of different superheroes claiming to be the true Superman. This includes a bionic version, a steel-armored version, a visored version, and a teenaged clone. Action Comics number 687. In Superman's fortress, Kryptonian robots work to reconstruct Superman but only manage to create a form that's pure energy. The being is confused about his current state, and the robots explain that they've been trying to recreate him from his essence. The being doesn't recall how he died and looks up the information on his death. He goes to Superman's tomb and puts himself in the lifeless body. While he feels whole, he knows there's something missing and some things are different. He can no longer absorb energy directly from the sun and stars, but must depend on the regeneration matrix of his fortress for it. He also notes that the least bit of light hurts his eyes and must always wear a visor to cut the glare. He watches the news about the increasing crime rate and goes off on patrol, fighting crime. His methods, however, are a lot more violent than the original Superman's, given that he stops an assault on a woman by killing the attacker and severely burns a carjacker. His sightings make the news, and it's discovered that Superman's coffin is empty. Lois catches up to him after he stops a plane from crashing into the city and manages to get him alone for a talk. He tells her that he recognizes her and remembers they were engaged, but he also tells her that he's changed now and Kent is gone. Superman, Man of Steel, number 22. In another part of Metropolis, a construction worker called Henry Johnson witnesses a drive-by shooting by a gang. He chases after the car and, though he's hurt, manages to grab the gun from the shooter, recognizing it as a secret weapon prototype called Toastmasters. As he recovers in the hospital, he remembers how Superman saved his life once, telling him to make it count for something. He gets out of the hospital and forges a steel suit of armor for himself. Donning a red cape with an S shield emblazoned on it, he decides to investigate the weapon supplier behind the prototype. He calls himself the Man of Steel. His investigation starts with the street gangs armed with Toastmasters, and he gets the name White Rabbit. Meanwhile, Luthor, who's also investigating the new weapons on the street, learns the name White Rabbit from Happerson, and that the rabbit is a woman. He tells Happerson that he'll let Man of Steel handle her for now, but that he wants to speak to him, stating that it might be useful to have a Man of Steel in his pocket. Superman number 78. A few days later, a cyborg version of Superman visits Star Labs, demanding to know where Doomsday's body is. He learns that Cadmus has the body and breaks into the underground facility. Cadmus's defense systems and personnel fail to slow him down, and Guardian is shocked to see Superman once again. Superman tells him that he's come back, but he's different due to the damage and that he's here to take Doomsday away. He uses his bionic arm to tap into the Cadmus computer and overrides the system to open the vault where Doomsday's body's kept. He picks up Doomsday's body, wrapped in metal cables, and flies it into space. He then fuses the body into an asteroid and throws it into a trajectory where it will never intersect with any galaxy, planet, or moon. He returns to Earth and speaks to Lois, telling her that a lot of his memories are a haze, but that he remembers a farm in Kansas and the name Kent. Lois then takes him to Professor Hamilton to verify his authenticity. Hamilton scans him and tells Lois that the machine half is Kryptonian in nature, while the biological half has DNA that matches the true Superman. He attributes the memory loss to the trauma Superman suffered and confirms that the cyborg is the true Superman come back to life. Adventures of Superman, number 501. The fourth Superman claimant, a teenage clone who escaped from Cadmus, gets friendly with an attractive GBS news reporter called Tana Moon and gives her a television interview stating that since he's a clone, he doesn't have the same memories as the previous Superman but does have all the same powers. GBS News puts him on a contract with exclusive rights and decides to increase viewership by curating the news around him. They decide to lead the boy to Suicide Slum, where a gang boss called Steel Hand is holed up, and live telecast the event. Things go as planned as Superboy gets there and fights his way in brazenly, capturing Steel Hand, shooting up the GBS ratings. That evening, the head of GBS News tells Tana that next time he'll arrange for Superboy to fight someone with powers and a costume. The Man of Steel Annual Number 2. Outside Metropolis, a group of 6 shape-shifting alien parasites land, intent on feeding off the juices of humans. Almost immediately, they encounter a biker gang and, after feeding off them, take on their forms. One of the aliens, Angon, goes into Metropolis, looking for prey. Angon starts feeding on the homeless, careful to keep silent and dispose of the bodies in the sewers so as not to attract attention. One of her victims is Tom O'Brien, a friend and neighbor of Henry Johnson. When Tom doesn't get home, Henry goes looking for him as Man of Steel. Tom's body is found by the Underworlders, but unlike Angon's other victims, he isn't dead, thanks to a dormant metagene that he didn't know he had. The attack activates the metagene, and as Tom wakes up, he finds he can't remember much and has blades sprouting all over his body, which he can fire at others. Looking around at the pile of bodies, Tom believes he's murdered them all and runs away into the tunnels. Man of Steel finds the bodies and the Underworlders tell him about Tom's sudden transformation. Just then, Angon drops another body down and Henry engages the creature, managing to wound it before it takes a human form and gets away. Going back into the tunnels, Steel finds Tom and convinces him that he's not a murderer, telling him of his mother and brother, whom Tom can't remember. The two of them then go off to find and fight Angon. As they get back home, Tom's younger brother Pete decides to call him Edge. Action Comics number 688. In Chicago, Guy Gardner reads about the 4 Superman claimants in a magazine and rushes off to Metropolis to confront them, convinced they're all fraudsters who are dishonoring Superman's name. Lois Lane, who's still trying to figure out which of the Supermen might be the real deal, visits a hospital where a safecracker claims that the visored Superman needlessly crushed all the bones in his hand while apprehending him. She tells Cat Grant that while the pretenders do stop crimes, unlike the original Superman, they're either too cold or cruel. Captain Sawyer gets promoted to Inspector by Henderson, the new commissioner, and is tasked to find out who the real Superman is. Gardner gets to Metropolis and engages the visored Superman, who calls himself the last son of Krypton, in a fight. As the two trade punches, Gardner realizes this Superman doesn't pull his punches and watches as he violently takes out a gang of arms dealers. He appreciates this new Superman and claims he's the real one. Superman returns to his fortress and watches the media reports where Maggie Sawyer says the real Superman would never have resorted to reckless mayhem while Gardner cheers him on, leading him to reflect on his actions and wonder if there's a better way to do things. Superman, Man of Steel, number 23. In Suicide Slum, as the Man of Steel apprehends a group of criminals armed with Toastmasters, he comes close to extracting the location of the White Rabbit from one of them, but the man is shot dead by the gang's camera person. Steel confiscates the guns and the camera and hands them over to the police. Lex Luthor obtains the tape from the authorities and, after enhancing the audio, learns that the individual captured on film was about to mention Spire, referring to the Metrospire Hotel. Luthor decides to use this information to tempt the Man of Steel into joining forces with him. Meanwhile, Lois Lane heads to the waterfront on the Daily Planet chopper to cover a clash between 2 rival gangs, which the Man of Steel, the only Superman she hasn't spoken to yet, is attempting to stop. Superboy also arrives with Tana and the WGBS chopper, intent on grabbing the spotlight away from Steel and establishing himself as the true Superman. As the gangsters take note of him, one of the rockets they're firing at him hits the Daily Planet chopper, resulting in the pilot's death and forcing Lois to bail out. Lois is rescued by the Man of Steel, and as he gets her to safety, she questions him about claiming to be Superman. He tells her that he never said he was Superman and flies away. The Man of Steel then admonishes Superboy for being reckless, telling him that the Daily Planet pilot was killed because of his actions. Superboy is upset, but he does question his own actions. Steel then meets Luthor, who tells him the rabbit's location and offers him W-Lex coverage. Steel turns down Luthor's offer for coverage and goes to the Spire to find the rabbit, oblivious of the bug that Lex put on him. Getting there, he finds that the rabbit is Angora Lapin, his former colleague and lover. Lapin stole one of his weapons designs and started manufacturing and selling them to gangs. She offers to cut him in on the profit, but Steel refuses and tells her he's turning her in. Angora shoots him with a Toastmaster, which blows him out the window and into the streets below, where he falls into an oil truck. Superboy pulls him out of the wreckage, explaining that he was following Steel to apologize for the pilot's death. Steel tells him he shares in the blame because he's the one who designed the weapons. They both get back to the Spire, but the rabbit has gone. Apperson calls Lex to tell him that though the bug was destroyed, he learned that Man of Steel's real name is John Henry Irons, and that he's a weapons designer wanted by the feds. Information that Lex intends to use to control the Steel Superman. Superman number 79. At the Daily Planet, novice reporter Ronald Troop sets out to prove himself to Perry White as being a worthy successor to Clark Kent. Perry tells him that if he can file a story that would have impressed Clark Kent, he can have Kent's job. Knowing that Kent had got his job by filing a story on Superman, Troop sets out to write a Superman story of his own. He focuses on the cyborg Superman, who had offered compelling evidence about being the actual Superman brought back to life. Troop reaches out to Max Lord, the Justice League civilian liaison, but is told that Lord is in Washington, D.C. to brief the president. Troop goes to DC and waits for Max to turn up outside the White House. He meets Max at the entrance and, as they talk, Kurak terrorists attack. The cyborg Superman arrives as White House security scrambles to neutralize the terrorists. Superman swiftly takes out the would-be assassins but comes under attack by the building's automated defense systems, which identify him as a threat. Max and Troop run into the White House and learn that the Secret Service are unable to shut down the defense systems, and only a target with security clearance, such as a Justice League member, can shut it down, and the only way to do that is to get a genetic tester out to Superman and get proof. Troop takes the tester and runs out into the field of fire trying to get it to Superman. Superman turns his cyborg arm into a sonic disruptor that disables the security systems, making it safe for Troop to run to him with the identifier. Troop uses the identifier to confirm Superman's identity, and the cyborg walks into the White House where he taps into the computers, linking himself to every database in the world. He then identifies a news article about some stolen explosives, credit card charges for a storage locker, a limousine rental, and a briefcase purchase. He then melts the briefcase in Max Lord's hands, explaining that the terrorists had replaced it with one that had a bomb inside, intending to use Max as an unwitting assassin. The president then enters and meets Superman, thanking him for saving his life and acknowledging him as the one true Superman. Troop turns in the article and Perry, clearly impressed, gives him Kent's desk. Superman Annual Number 5. In Metropolis, the bodies in the sewer left by the parasite Angon are discovered, and cyborg Superman tries to gain the trust of Commissioner Henderson by assisting in the tracking down of the killers. Meanwhile, two of the extraterrestrial parasites named Gimir and Venev stumble upon a junkyard outside Metropolis while searching for humans to prey on. They drain the spinal fluids of a local security guard, and Gimir even feeds on a discarded corpse that was dumped in the junkyard. Unexpectedly, the corpse from the dump comes back to life as her metagene gets activated due to the alien feeding. She's revealed to be Sasha Green, a former martial arts instructor to Lex Luthor, who was murdered by him for showing him up. Sasha suffers from complete amnesia as she's just been resurrected and aimlessly wanders into a health club. When an elderly woman touches her shoulder, Sasha gains all her memories and personality traits. Later, while driving away from the club, she touches a dying, punkish youth with a gunshot wound and absorbs all his traits and memories as well. The bodies at the landfill are discovered, and after investigating, cyborg Superman identifies the involvement of extraterrestrials. He presents his findings to Lex Luthor, who he believes to be on the side of justice. He seeks Luthor's assistance in understanding what happened to Sasha Green in her final hours before she was seemingly murdered by the aliens. Commissioner Henderson joins them in their efforts. Everyone's taken aback when Sasha Green is seen approaching LexCorp Tower with a gun. Luthor tries to silence her using his building's defense systems, using the gun still in her hand as an excuse, but cyborg Superman intervenes and prevents the shots. They then take her to the LexCorp laboratories for further examination. Luthor, still determined to eliminate Sasha so that she can't wake up and identify him as her killer, initiates an explosion in another part of the building to lure Superman away. He then orders one of his assassins, Gillian Simmons, to take Sasha away and kill her. As Simmons makes physical contact with Green in the chopper, Sasha absorbs her personality, gaining temporary control over her, and orders Simmons to shoot herself. The helicopter crashes, but Sasha survives, walking away with all the acquired skills of a seasoned assassin, now called Myriad. Luthor tells Superman that Green has died in the chopper crash, and Superman believes him, seeing a woman's body charred beyond recognition in the flaming wreckage. Adventures of Superman number 502. Lex invites Superboy for dinner and asks him to join Team Luthor with Supergirl and grant exclusive coverage rights to WLEX News. Smitten by Supergirl, Superboy agrees without thinking it through and says he'll sign the contract the following day. Later that evening, Vincent Edge gives him Clark Kent's old apartment and introduces him to Rex Leach, who will take over as his manager. Superboy signs an exclusive contract with WGBS, having forgotten about his agreement with Luthor. As they leave, Edge tells Tana that the following day will be a big news day, and she feels that Edge is manipulating Superboy, and Edge reminds her that she's replaceable. The next day, Superboy is attacked by the Stinger, a costumed assassin hired by Edge. The two fight near a bridge, and Supergirl arrives to help Superboy. Stinger fires explosive charges at the bridge as he makes his escape. A guilt-ridden Tana watches from above as the explosives go off, causing civilian casualties. Meanwhile, a spaceship geared for warheads for Earth. The final story arc is titled The Return of Superman, and it picks up with the destruction of the bridge. Action Comics number 689. As Superboy and Supergirl start rescuing as many people as they can from the river, Tana regrets getting mixed up with Edge. In the fortress, the regeneration matrix overloads and bursts, revealing yet another Superman who's disoriented and dressed in all black. The fortress robots bring him up to speed on events around the world, including the 4 individuals claiming to be Superman. Superman number 24. In Metropolis, the last son of Krypton fights with the Man of Steel when the latter calls him a fraud for being too violent. Steel tells him that he never claimed to be Superman, but only wears it to honor the man. The last son apologizes and realizes that it takes more than just power to be Superman. He tells the Man of Steel to go back and patrol Metropolis while he goes to Coast City. Luthor's men capture the White Rabbit and he tells her that he'll give her the Man of Steel because Steel refused to work for him. She ambushes him at her weapons factory, but he gets away and she dies when the factory collapses on her. Superman number 80. At Coast City, the last son of Krypton helps put out a fire and learns that an alien ship is heading for the city. At the same time, the White House calls the cyborg about the spaceship and asks him to investigate it. The spacecraft hovers over the city and releases thousands of bombs over the area. As the last son goes to investigate it, Cyborg attacks him, revealing that he summoned the alien craft to destroy the city. The bombs explode simultaneously, flattening the city and killing 7 million people. The last son is severely wounded in the explosion and heads back to the fortress to recuperate. The spaceship then drops some seeds into the ground which burrow deep into the earth and automatically start constructing a huge engine, while Cyborg sends a false report to the White House saying the last son of Krypton was responsible for the explosion and there's just an empty crater where Coast City used to be. He requests the president to send in Superboy to assist him. Adventures of Superman number 503. In Antarctica, the latest Superman puts on a giant Kryptonian battlesuit and bursts out of the fortress, making his way to Metropolis. Superboy goes to the erstwhile Coast City, now called Engine City, and gets ambushed by Cyborg. Outmatched, he loses the fight and is taken captive by Cyborg. It's also revealed that the spacecraft is captained by the alien Mongol, who, along with Cyborg, intends to make Earth into a new war world, the ultimate weapon. Action Comics number 690. Cyborg then tells the Justice League that Last Son and the aliens have escaped to an asteroid belt, directing them to hunt down the criminals. Last Son, meanwhile, gets back to the fortress and finds the energy matrix broken and the battlesuit gone. As he slowly recovers in a nutrient bath, it's revealed that Last Son is a sentient Kryptonian artificial intelligence system called Eradicator, who stole Clark's body, placing it within the matrix as a power source for himself while he took on the form of Superman. Superman number 25. Superboy discovers that he has the power to disassemble metallic structures and breaks free of his bonds, managing to escape from Engine City. He reaches Metropolis just as the Kryptonian battlesuit gets there, seemingly out of control. Superboy tells them about Cyborg's treachery and intentions to create a second Engine City in Metropolis. Superboy, Supergirl, and Man of Steel work together, bringing it to a stop. Superman number 81. Lex Luthor and Lois Lane are also on the scene when the last Superman emerges from within, claiming he's the real Superman and he's back, but his powers haven't completely returned yet. He notes that none of them believes him, and he takes Lois aside and tells her the name of Clark's favorite movie and other personal moments before kissing her and telling her he'll always love her. Adventures of Superman number 504. Clark, Man of Steel, and Superboy head for Engine City and launch an assault, taking on Mongol's men. As they move through the city, they discover a silo with a missile being prepped for launch at Metropolis. They're unable to stop the launch, but Superboy manages to grab onto it. He uses his powers to push and divert the missile out toward the sea, where it explodes over the water. Action Comics number 691. In Antarctica, Eradicator recovers completely, supercharging himself with all the energy in the fortress and heads for Engine City, vowing to avenge his earlier defeat. In Engine City, Clark and Steel fight their way down to the sublevels looking for Cyborg. Steel realizes that someone's watching their back, and it's revealed that Supergirl secretly came along with them, using her power to stay invisible and help them fight. Superman number 26. Mongol gets the massive engines ready to fire and take Earth out of its orbit, but his plan is thwarted by Steel, who manages to destroy the engine. Clark and Supergirl fight Mongol, but they're unable to stop him. Green Lantern number 46. Green Lantern arrives at Engine City and fights his way past the defenses and Mongol's men. He gets to Mongol and defeats him. Superman number 82. Eradicator also gets there around the same time. He finds Clark and together they go after Cyborg. As they search for Cyborg, the Eradicator tells Clark how he resuscitated Clark's body by placing it in the Matrix chamber. They find Cyborg in the city's gas tank, where they see that the power source is a huge rock of kryptonite. Cyborg explains that the radiation it gives off is used to power the city. He fires a beam of kryptonite energy at Clark, but Eradicator sacrifices himself by coming in front of the beam, taking the full brunt of it. The Eradicator dies, but the beam that passed through him changed and restored Clark to his full powers. Clark then easily defeats Cyborg, and the gang gets back to Metropolis. The Adventures of Superman number 505. The story comes to a close as Clark reunites with Lois and patrols Metropolis once more. Marvelous verdict: the death of Superman is one of the key moments of the DC universe which shocked fans when it first came out. If you're picking it up today, you know that Superman has survived, but it's the one story that established that even Superman can die. While not every story is as gripping, and you may even want to skip a few issues, this is a recommended read for those who have been introduced to Superman in the last 2 decades. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, and be safe. Thanks everyone.